Hello, today is the day we're finishing the jacket. There's no other goal. There's no goal in this whole video except for finishing the jacket. So let's get started. For those who haven't been following the whole process from the beginning, I've decided I'm making a new shoulder season jacket because my current one is just a black workwear jacket. It's very boring. It's very utilitarian. So I picked the Flora jacket. I'll link the pattern down below. And I decided I was going to make my own quilted fabric to make the jacket out of. I'm using 7 different colors. Bought the fabric about a month ago, and I spent the last month cutting out 2x2 inch squares and piecing and sandwiching every single piece of this jacket. Instead of making one really big piece of fabric, I've instead been making pieces that are just large enough for the dimensions of the different parts of the jacket and then cutting them out of that. Where do we stand today? I am so proud and happy to say that we are finished making the fabric. So last video I left off with just the hood and the front of the jacket to be finished. I am proud to say that the hoods are finished, the front of the jacket is finished, everything has been pieced, everything has been quilted. It's beautiful. It's all ready to actually be made into a jacket. I've also spent a couple hours making what is arguably probably way too much bias binding, but I'd rather just make too much bias binding and use it for a different project than run out of bias binding halfway through finishing the project. We are now in the final stages. By final stages, I mean we're actually going to make the jacket now. Okay, so the pockets and plackets are on. I'm extremely happy with how it is turning out. So now's the time to talk about how I'm going to be finishing the edges of the final jacket. The pattern wants you to serge or zigzag all of the edges and then just iron them open. However, because my fabric is so thick, that's a lot of extra bulk. And because it's quilted fabric, you'll see the lining, the batting, and the fabric all just there. I don't have a serger, so I can't serge the edges, and I could zigzag them on my other machine, but I don't really feel like it. So what I think I'm going to do is similar actually to how the inside edges are finished in this vest. This is Sydney Graham's Ruby vest. I think what I'm going to do is use some of that bias binding, which is why I made so much, and bind all of the inside seams, which does add a lot of extra work, especially because I can machine sew on one half of this, but I do have to hand sew on the whole other half. It's going to add on a lot of extra work, but I think it's going to just look cleaner at the end, and the inside will be, all of the seams will be fully encased. So I think that's what my plan is. I'm going to finish the shoulder seams, and then I will sew on the sleeves. It's getting so close to being an actual jacket. Okay, so I've made some seriously good progress on the jacket. I have attached everything except for the hood to the jacket, but I have sewn both halves of the hood together. I've made a little bit of a change on how I'm binding all of the inside seams. So instead of sewing the seam and then sewing the binding onto that seam, I'm holding the binding together when I sew that seam. And then I'm cutting the inside piece to about 1/4 and then folding it over and hand sewing it. I certainly think that I'm overdoing it. I could just zigzag stitch all of the raw seams, but I'm really enjoying how it's looking. This is what the shoulder seam looks like. And I think it's just so clean. Everything is going to be so well encased and beautiful, and it'll just look really, really nice on the outside and the inside. Though it does mean that there's a lot of extra work with all of that hand sewing. Thankfully, I realized that the binding that goes around the whole outside is sewn the same way that the pockets are. So that it's top stitched. And so I can do that whole thing by machine instead of by hand, which is going to save so much time. It would have been a really long time to hand sew that whole thing in, which is good. The single hardest part so far of this was the sleeves. It was so thick to get through all those layers, and then to go through and like trim down the one side, it's just been a little bit of a nightmare. And I fear that the hood's going to be the same thing. It's quite thick with all of those layers. So far, it hasn't been that bad. I did change the needle on my machine to a jeans needle so that it can handle like all those extra layers. I don't think it would be possible to do with just a universal needle. And the other thing that I learned that is very important is when I was sewing on these pockets, when you get to the edges, like here and over here, when you get to those edges, you have a lot of layers to go through because there's the 3 layers of the front panel, and then there's the 3 layers of the pocket itself, and then at those 2 corners, it's folded over, so there's 3 more layers. So you're kind of going through like 9 layers plus the binding, so like 12 layers, and it's really, really thick. And essentially, even without putting the foot down, I could barely get it through my machine. So I did find that it was way easier, instead of starting at those really thick parts and then trying to sew over them, I instead started in the middle of the pocket and then went towards those really thick parts. So I started like here, and then I sewed all the way around the pocket, And then I turned around and I came back and I just did this little section. And then same thing. I started here and I went and I did this little section here. And then I turned the whole piece around and I started and I went over this thick piece here. And I think that was really, really helpful rather than trying to like navigate these really, really thick parts. And then the way I sewed on the pocket means that it kind of pops up like this. I like that look. I think maybe in the pattern they wanted you to sew 1/8 of an inch away from the outer edge. So it was kind of there's two lines of stitching along the whole pocket. But I didn't want to do that. I didn't like that look. So instead I did sewed over where the top stitching was from when I sewed down the binding. And I think that's really nice. I also went back and forth about 6 times, like back stitching back and forth on these corners because that's where there's going to be the most pull from like putting your hands into the pocket. What else did I do? Oh, the last thing was I did not put the pocket where they suggested. So I think they suggested 1/2 of an inch in from the placket and then 1 inch from the bottom, and I put mine a little lower. That was just personal preference. I feel like in the pictures, the pockets always looked so high up, and I hate it when you go to put a pocket, your hand in your pocket, and you're like, your shoulder's like halfway up to your ear. So I moved my pockets down a little lower. It does mean the bottom of the pocket is essentially going to overlap with the binding at the bottom of the jacket, but I don't care about that. So I'd rather the pocket be in a better place. So when it comes to the amount of fabric that I purchased for this whole thing, the size large flora jacket called for 2.5 yards of fabric. I'm Canadian, so I was getting my fabric in meterage, and I ended up getting 2.5 meters of the lining fabric. I didn't need 2.5 meters. I think I only ended up needing 2 meters of that total. But I also wasn't being particularly careful about lining up the grain lines. That was just because I knew it was going to be quilted. So if you are using something that is like very important, the grain lines, keep that in mind. For the quilting fabrics, between the 2 times that I went to the fabric store to buy more fabric, I ended up getting 1/2 meter of 6 of the 7 colors. And I have about 10 centimeters left of that meterage. So I would say you probably need around 40 centimeters of the fabric to make the 2x2 squares and then sew them the way I did. For the light pink and the dark green that I used as the binding, I got 1 meter of both of those. With the light pink, I used all but probably 20 centimeters of that. So that tracks. There was twice as much of it in the pattern, and so I used twice as much fabric. The dark green, I certainly didn't need a full meter of it, but I really didn't want to run out of binding. I'm not sure exactly how much I used in total because I did make all of the binding on the bias, so that ate up a lot of fabric as well. And then also, I was binding all of the inside seams. Take that with a grain of salt. I don't know if you'd need a full meter of it if you weren't binding the insides and if you weren't making the binding on the bias. I used about 1 meter total of the dark green fabric. And then for the quilt binding, same thing as the lining. Though I got my quilt binding in blanket sized, so I used 2 1/4 crib sized pieces of fabric. I think if you had 2 or 2.5 meters of quilting batting, that would be more than enough. I used 100% cotton batting, and it's made the whole thing like very warm, but not too thick. Because of the high quality of the batting, it's a very like thin batting, and so the whole jacket isn't too thick. It also makes it very easy to like sew through it all. Here I am with my jacket being held like how those guys hold fish that they've fished, and the sleeves are sewn up. I am terrified it's not going to fit. I'm terrified it's not going to fit. So let's try it on. It's perfect. Oh my god. There's a mirror right here. I'm so happy. I'm so happy. It's amazing. I'm so happy. Oh, it's perfect. It's so perfect. It's so amazing. It's exactly what I wanted. I think it's hitting me exactly where I wanted to. It's not too baggy. The sleeves, thank God I added that extra length because they would have been too short. Oh my God, I'm so happy. It's so great. Okay, here's my thoughts. I'm thinking I kind of want to put a drawstring in the hood just because I live in a very windy place. And so sometimes you're out walking and you want to be able to cinch in your hood. So I'm considering putting a drawstring. And then I have brass buttons. I have brass like snaps for this whole thing. I have 8 of them. They're right here. I'm a little concerned they're going to be too small. but I'll have to pull them out and check. If they are too small, when I'm in Ottawa next week, I'll just get bigger ones. That was the biggest size that they had at my fabric store, but I am so happy. It's worth it. Every single second of the last 3 weeks. This is going to be a great jacket. I'm like speechless. I'm so happy with this. So next steps, now that it actually fits, I need to finish the wrist binding because I unpicked a bunch of it when I was doing up the arms. And then I'm going to go through and trim off the one side of all of the seams so that those are all ready to hand stitch. And then I might machine sew on all of the binding on the outside because then it'll be like done and I can just focus on doing the hand sewing later on because I don't need the hand sewing to be done to wear the jacket. That's just something that I want to do. But I do need to finish the wrists and put on all the outside binding. In order to add a drawstring to the hood, I think instead of doing like one continuous binding that's all the way up, I might start one of the bindings like here, go all the way around, and then end it here, and then do a second binding where I fold over the edge and overlap them a little bit, and then go around the hood so that there's space to put a drawstring. Now the question is, do I want an actual string drawstring? Because if I actually want that, I don't have any. Or I could use some of my leftover of this dark green and make strings. Similar to the Sophie vest, where in the Sophie vest you make like this string. I could do that for the hood. I'd have to leave more space in the binding to be able to pull a drawstring through. So I'd probably have to make that string first so that I know how like loose to sew on the binding around the hood. Thoughts. Because I think I want that. I think I would like a way to kind of cinch in this hood if I have to. Also, because it's quilted and kind of thick, it's got a little bit of a point here. That doesn't really matter. It's a hood. Ooh, and the inside, like, it doesn't clash. I don't know if it really goes too much, but I like it. And they didn't have any other flannels. I'm so happy with this. I can't get over the whole clip is just me saying I'm so happy with it. It's perfect. It's exactly what I wanted. I was just complaining earlier today about how it's still cold here. It's like 0 degrees. But I'm glad that it's still cold because when I finish this jacket, it means I can wear it. Because this is an amazing jacket. And with that final moment in the basement, I am finished with the jacket. I've actually been wearing it for probably close to a month at this point, and it's perfect. It's exactly what I wanted. I get compliments on it all the time, which is not the goal of making something, but it does make it feel great when you make something and people love it. The colors are great, the fit is great. 10 out of 10 project. I'm so happy with the results. And I hope you like it too.